I found the rat poison receipt in my son Mark's jacket pocket while he napped on my sofa, just hours after burying their father. My hands trembled as I read the date, purchased months ago, around when Robert's health began failing. Today, they plan to discuss moving me to Shady Pines retirement home after dinner. I slipped the paper back and crept toward the basement stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. Confirm the nerve paralytic toxin ampules from Robert's private collection still sat undisturbed in the cold storage unit. My composure. Each step felt like walking on shattered glass, the grief a physical weight. Mark stirred, mumbling about investment portfolios, his greed a constant pressure. Just as my fingers brushed the basement doorknob, the doorbell rang, a delivery for a package I never ordered. The interruption froze me in place. I cracked the door open to see a uniformed man holding a flat box labeled Shady Pines Welcome Kit. My blood ran cold. The micro-twist came when I noticed Mark was now awake, watching me from the hallway with a sharp, calculating smile. He knew I was snooping. My breath caught as he took a step forward, his voice dripping with false concern. "Mum, you shouldn't be down here alone." I forced a smile and claimed I was fetching Christmas decorations, my mind racing. Mark bought the lie, for now, but his eyes held a warning. My new retrieve one ampule undetected before dinner. Escalating paranoia. Every creak of the house felt like an accusation. Down in the basement, the air hung thick with dust and memories. Robert's lab corner stood preserved, beakers and vials neatly arranged. Antagonist pressure mounted when I heard my daughter Sarah's voice upstairs, her tone brisk as she scheduled a tour of Shady Pines for tomorrow. I focused on the locked mini-fridge where Robert stored his most volatile compounds. The key was hidden inside an old chemistry textbook, our little secret. As I reached for it, a Sarah called down, asking if I needed help. I shoved the book back, heart pounding. She descended the stairs, her heels clicking like a countdown. But the micro-twist. The fridge lock was already picked, the door slightly ajar. Someone had been here recently. Sarah paused midway, her gaze fixed on the disturbed dust around the fridge. "Looking for something, Mum?" she asked, her voice too sweet. I lied again, saying I was searching for Robert's old photo albums, my palms sweating. Sarah nodded, but her eyes narrowed. My goal shifted. I needed to distract her and check the fridge contents immediately. My dwindling trust in my own home. Every friendly gesture felt like a trap. Upstairs, Mark was on the phone with a lawyer, discussing power of attorney. I suggested making Robert's favourite stew for dinner, a sentimental ploy to buy time. Sarah agreed, heading to the kitchen, but not before casting a lingering glance at the basement. Downstairs, I hurried to the fridge. The pattern interrupt came when the stew pot clattered loudly from the kitchen, followed by Sarah's curse. She'd burned herself. Seizing the moment, I opened the fridge. The ampules were there, but one was missing from the rack. My throat tightened. The micro-twist. A note in Robert's handwriting tucked beside them, dated weeks before his death. If you're reading this, they've already started. Footsteps approached again, faster this time. Sarah called out, her voice strained. "Mum, we need to talk about the house deed." I stuffed the note into my apron pocket, my hands shaking. Sarah stood at the foot of the stairs, holding an ice pack to her hand, her expression unreadable. My plant doubt in her mind without revealing my knowledge. The emotional toll of pretending ignorance while mourning. I asked if she remembered how Robert taught them lab safety, a subtle probe. She stiffened, then laughed it off, saying those days were long gone. Antagonist pressure intensified as Mark joined us, announcing the lawyer would visit tomorrow to simplify things. I played the confused grandmother, asking innocent questions about inheritance law. The doorbell rang again, neighbours with a condolence casserole. While they were distracted, I slipped the note into Sarah's coat pocket, hoping she'd find it later. But the micro twist. Mark intercepted the casserole, and, while setting it down, his phone buzzed with a text I glimpsed. Dispose of remaining evidence ASAP. He didn't see me notice. As the neighbours left, Sarah pulled me aside, her voice low. Mum, maybe you should rest upstairs? Her hand on my arm felt like a shackle. I let her lead me to my room, my mind racing over that text. My access Robert's lab notes on the toxins antidote, stored in his study. The risk of triggering their suspicion further. I was playing a dangerous game. Upstairs, I pretended to doze in my armchair while they whispered in the hall. Mark mentioned cleaning the basement tonight. Pressure mounted. Time was running out. Once alone, I crept to Robert's study, the room untouched since his death. His desk was locked, but I knew the combination. Our anniversary date. The Sarah entered, claiming she needed to organize Dad's papers. I feigned sleep, listening as she rifled through drawers. She pulled out a file labeled Toxin Antidote Research and tucked it under her arm. The micro twist. She didn't leave. Instead, she sat down and began reading it intently, her face pale. I realized she might be looking for a way to protect herself. Just then, Mark called from downstairs, his voice urgent. Sarah, we have a problem with the will. She stood, leaving the file on the chair, and hurried out. I waited until her footsteps faded, then snatched the file, my copy the antidote formula before they returned. The crushing loneliness. Robert's absence screamed in the silence. I scanned the pages. Complex chemical structures, dosage notes. Robert had developed an antidote, but it required a rare compound only he could synthesize. Antagonist pressure. Mark's voice grew louder as he argued with Sarah about tying up loose ends. I hurried to the photocopier in the hall, my hands trembling. The machine jammed, whirring loudly. Sarah shouted from below, "What's that noise?" I froze, then pretended to be fixing a framed photo. She appeared at the stairwell, eyes scanning me. "Just a loose wire, dear," I mumbled. The micro twist. As she turned away, I noticed a hidden compartment in the photocopier. Robert's secret stash. Inside were more ampules and a dated journal. I grabbed one ampule and the journal, stuffing them into my dress. Sarah called up. "Mum, come down for dinner. We have news." Her tone was final. I joined them at the table, the ampule cold against my skin. My eavesdrop on their news while planning my first move, the nausea from their cheerful chatter about my new home. They served the stew, but I couldn't eat. Mark announced the lawyer had accelerated the process. I'd be moved to Shady Pines in 2 days. Sarah smiled, patting my hand. "It's for your safety, Mom." Antagonist pressure. They discussed selling the house and dividing the proceeds, ignoring my presence. Then my phone rang. Robert's old lab partner, Dr. Evans, whom I hadn't spoken to in years. I excused myself, answering in the hallway. He asked if Robert had given me the package, his voice urgent. I played dumb, but he warned, "Your children aren't who you think." The micro twist. As I hung up, I saw Sarah listening from the dining room, her smile gone. She approached slowly. "Who was that, Mom?" she asked, her eyes cold. I backed toward the kitchen, my hand closing around the ampule in my pocket. I lied, saying it was a wrong number. But Sarah didn't believe me. My create a diversion to test the toxin's potency safely. the moral line I was crossing. Revenge felt both justified and monstrous. I suggested making tea, moving to the kitchen. While boiling water, I pretended to drop a spoon, using the moment to examine the ampule. It was labelled VX7 with a skull icon. Antagonist pressure. Mark joined us, mentioning he'd cleaned the basement already. My heart sank. Had he found the stash? The tea kettle whistled, startling us all. I accidentally spilled hot water on the floor, creating a mess. As I bent to clean it, I palmed the ampule and slipped it into a sugar jar. The micro twist. Mark knelt to help, his hand brushing against mine, and he froze, staring at the jar. "Since when do you use sugar, Mum?" he asked, his voice tight. I realized he knew I was hiding something. Sarah watched from the doorway, her arms crossed. "We need to talk about that phone call," she said. I stood up, my knees weak, and claimed it was for baking. I retrieved the ampule and journal before they searched my room, the escalating fear that I'd lose everything. Mark and Sarah exchanged a look, then insisted on helping me to my room. Upstairs, they hovered as I changed into nightclothes, their eyes scanning every corner. Antagonist pressure. Sarah mentioned inventorying Dad's lab equipment tomorrow. I knew they were on to me. Once they left, I checked under my mattress. The journal was safe. The noise from the garden, a cat knocking over a pot. I peered out the window and saw Mark digging near the rose bushes, where Robert used to bury lab waste. My blood ran cold. The micro twist. He unearthed a small metal box and opened it, pulling out several vials similar to the ampules. He wasn't disposing of evidence. He was retrieving more. As I watched, he looked up directly at my window, his face illuminated by the porch light. He saw me. I ducked away from the window, my heart pounding. I confront them with the journal evidence before they acted. The potential for total loss. Of family. Of freedom. I grabbed the journal and hid it in my robe, then headed downstairs, feigning thirst. Mark was already inside, wiping dirt from his hands. "Everything all right, Mum?" he asked, his tone casual but eyes sharp. Sarah emerged from the study, holding Robert's old ledger. "We found some discrepancies in the accounts," she said, her voice smooth. Antagonist pressure. They were cornering me with financial lies. The doorbell chimed. Dr. Evans stood there, looking frazzled. "I had to come," he blurted. "Robert sent me a letter before he died." Mark stepped forward, blocking the door. The micro twist. Dr. Evans handed me an envelope, his hands shaking. "He knew they were poisoning him," he whispered. Sarah snatched it from me, her face twisting in rage. "You had no right to come here," she spat. Mark grabbed Dr. Evans' arm, but I stepped between them, the journal heavy in my pocket. "Let him speak," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Sarah's eyes dropped to the bulge in my robe, and she smiled coldly. "Or what, Mom? You'll poison us too?" I held Sarah's gaze, my voice calm as I denied her accusation, though the journal in my pocket felt like a live wire. My immediate goal was to get Dr. Evans out safely without escalating the confrontation. The shred of family pretense left, every word carved deeper into my grief. Mark tightened his grip on Dr. Evans's arm, his face a mask of controlled fury. "You shouldn't have come here, old man," he snarled. The pattern interrupt came when Dr. Evans yanked free and shoved the envelope into my hands. "Read it aloud," he insisted, his eyes pleading. I unfolded the letter. Robert's handwriting detailed how he'd suspected the poisoning and had hidden evidence in the lab ventilation shaft. The micro twist. Sarah laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Dad was paranoid at the end," she said, but her hand trembled as she reached for the letter. I pulled it back, and Mark stepped closer, his phone in hand. "I'm calling the police about this trespasser," he declared. But as he dialed, the door pushed open wider, and a neighbour stood there, holding a pie. "I heard voices. Everything okay?" she asked, her cheerful tone slicing through the tension. Mark lowered the phone, forcing a smile. "Fine. Just a family discussion." The neighbour lingered, and I seized the moment to whisper to Dr. Evans, "Meet me at the library tomorrow." He nodded, slipping out as Mark distracted the neighbour. Sarah watched me, her eyes narrowed to slits. "This isn't over, Mum," she murmured, then turned to follow Mark. I stood alone in the foyer, the letter crumpled in my fist, and knew I had to act before they did. Alone in the silence, I retreated to my room and locked the door, my hands shaking as I smoothed out Robert's letter. To retrieve the evidence from the ventilation shaft before my children could dispose of it. The unbearable weight of betrayal. Each breath felt like drawing glass into my lungs. Downstairs, I heard Mark and Sarah arguing, their voices sharp over the clink of glasses, probably discussing how to handle Dr. Evans. Antagonist pressure mounted when Sarah called up. "Mum, we're ordering takeout. Your favourite, like nothing's wrong." Her attempt at normalcy was a vile pantomime. I waited until their voices faded, then crept to the hall closet for the stepladder. The doorbell rang again, and I froze, ladder in hand. It was a delivery driver with flowers, another condolence gift. Mark answered, his tone overly gracious, but I saw him slip the driver a folded bill. A bribe? My heart raced. As he shut the door, I hurried to the basement, avoiding the squeaky third step. The micro-twist. The ventilation shaft cover was already loose, dust disturbed around the edges. Someone had been here recently. I pried it open and felt inside, my fingers brushing against a metal box. But as I pulled it out, a shadow fell over me. Sarah stood at the bottom of the stairs, holding a flashlight. "Looking for something, Mum?" she asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I clutched the box to my chest, my mind racing for an excuse. I stammered that I was checking for drafts, my grip tightening on the metal box. Sarah's smile didn't reach her eyes as she offered to help me back upstairs, to open the box in private and see what Robert had hidden. The erosion of my sanity. Every lie felt like a layer of my soul peeling away. Upstairs, Mark was on the phone in the study, his voice low but urgent. Something about liquidating assets quickly. I retreated to my room, claiming fatigue, and locked the door again. The box was small, locked with a combination lock. I tried Robert's birthday, then mine. Nothing. Antagonist pressure. Sarah knocked, asking if I needed tea, her tone laced with concern that set my teeth on edge. I ignored her, focusing on the lock. The My Phone vibrated. A text from Dr. Evans. "Library at 10 a.m. Bring everything." His timing was a lifeline. I tried our anniversary date on the lock, and it clicked open. The micro-twist. Inside wasn't just documents. There was a single ampule of the toxin, labelled with a red stripe, and a note. "For emergency use only. Antidote requires my special compound." Footsteps approached my door, and Mark's voice cut through the wood. "Mum, open up. We need to discuss your medication schedule." His words were polite, but the threat underneath was clear. I shoved the box under my bed, my heart hammering. "Just a minute," I called, wiping sweat from my brow. I opened the door to Mark's impatient face, forcing a smile. He held a pill organizer, his eyes scanning my room. "The doctor recommended we manage your prescriptions," he said, too smoothly, to hide the box and ampule before he searched. The humiliation of being treated like a child in my own home. I let him in, pretending to tidy up, while sliding the box under a pile of laundry. Mark set the organizer on my nightstand, his gaze lingering on Robert's photo. "You know, Dad would want you to be safe," he murmured. Antagonist pressure. Sarah joined us, holding a stack of brochures for Shady Pines. "We booked the tour for tomorrow," she announced, her tone final. I nodded, playing along, but my mind was on the library meeting. The house phone rang, and Mark went to answer it. I heard him say, "Yes, officer, we'll be there," before hanging up. Sarah glanced at me, then followed him out. The micro twist. When I checked the box later, the ampule was gone. Only the note remained. Someone had taken it while I was distracted. Panic surged as I realized they might be one step ahead. I hurried to the window and saw Mark in the driveway, talking on his phone and holding something small and glass-like. He looked up, caught my eye, and gave a slow, deliberate wave. My blood ran cold. He knew I had it, and now he had it back. I backed away from the window, my mind racing, to retrieve the ampule and get to Dr. Evans without being followed. The terrifying realization that my children were not just greedy, but calculating killers. I heard Sarah in the kitchen, humming as she packed a bag. For my move, I assumed. Antagonist pressure. Mark entered my room without knocking, holding the pill organizer. "Time for your evening dose, Mum," he said, his eyes cold. I took the pills, pretending to swallow, but tucked them under my tongue. Once he left, I spat them out and flushed them, my hands trembling. The power suddenly went out, plunging the house into darkness. Sarah cursed from downstairs, and Mark shouted about a tripped breaker. I used the cover to sneak into the hall, feeling for the stairs. The micro-twist. As I reached the main floor, a flashlight beam swept over me, Sarah holding it high, her face eerily lit. "Looking for something, Mom?" she asked again, but this time her voice held a new edge. She stepped closer, and I saw the ampule in her other hand. "You shouldn't play with things you don't understand," she whispered, then turned and walked away, leaving me in the dark. I stood frozen, the hum of the refrigerator kicking back on as power returned. I had to get to that library meeting, but now they were watching my every move. I waited until the house settled, the faint sounds of TV from the living room indicating they were distracted, to slip out unnoticed and meet Dr. Evans at the library, the gnawing fear that I was becoming as deceitful as they were. I dressed in dark clothes, pocketed the journal, and crept to the back door. Antagonist pressure. As I turned the knob, Mark called out, "Mum, where are you going?" I froze, then claimed I was taking out the trash. He appeared in the hallway holding a garbage bag. "I'll do it," he said, his eyes narrowing. "You should rest." I nodded, retreating, but knew I had to find another way. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Evans. "Can't make library. Too dangerous. Meet at old lab. Midnight." My heart sank. The lab was across town and I had no car. I texted back a confirmation, then racked my brain for an escape. The micro-twist. I remembered Robert's hidden spare key for the garage where he kept his vintage motorcycle. If I could reach it, I might have a chance. But as I turned toward the garage, Sarah stepped out of the shadows, holding a set of car keys. "Going somewhere, Mom?" she asked, dangling them like a taunt. I forced a smile. "Just getting some air." She laughed, but her eyes were deadly serious. "I'll join you," she said, looping her arm through mine. "We can talk about your new room at Shady Pines." I let Sarah lead me to the porch, her grip firm on my arm, to break free and reach the garage without raising alarm. The visceral dread of her touch, a reminder of how far she'd fallen. We sat on the swing, and she chatted about the retirement home's amenities, pool, activities, all while her eyes scanned the street. Antagonist pressure. Mark joined us, carrying 2 glasses of wine. "To family," he said, handing one to me. I took it, pretending to sip, but the smell made me nauseous. I needed a distraction. The A-dog from next door barked loudly, chasing a squirrel into our yard. Mark stood to shoo it away, and Sarah turned to watch. I seized the moment, accidentally spilling my wine on her lap. She yelped, jumping up, and I apologized profusely, offering to get a towel. As I hurried inside, I heard her cursing. The micro twist. When I reached the kitchen, I saw Mark's phone on the counter, unlocked and open to a text thread with Sarah. Once she's at Shady Pines, we search the house and destroy everything. My hands shook as I backed away, but then I noticed a key ring with the garage key on it. I snatched it and slipped out the back door. The garage was dark, but I fumbled for the motorcycle. As I touched the cold metal, a voice behind me made me jump. "Leaving so soon, Grandma?" It was Mark, standing in the doorway holding a tire iron. "We can't have that," he said, stepping closer. I faced Mark, my heart pounding, the garage key digging into my palm. To get on the motorcycle and escape. But he blocked the exit. The crushing realization that my own son would hurt me. I backed toward the bike, my mind racing for a lie. "I just wanted to feel close to your father," I said, my voice trembling. Mark smirked, hefting the tire iron. "Save it, Mum. We know you have the toxin." Antagonist pressure. Headlights swept the driveway. Sarah pulling in, probably returning from some errand. She'd see us any second. I had to act fast. The motorcycle's engine coughed to life when I turned the key. Robert had kept it in working order. The roar startled Mark, and I revved it, aiming for the gap between him and the wall. He swung the tire iron, but I ducked, and the bike lurched forward. The micro twist. As I sped out, I saw Sarah standing by her car, her mouth open in shock. But she didn't chase me. Instead, she pulled out her phone and made a call, her expression grim. I raced down the street, the wind whipping my hair. But in the rearview mirror, I spotted a dark sedan pulling out from the curb, following me. They had planned for this. I swerved into an alley, my hands slick with sweat, and knew I was far from safe. I wove through back streets, the motorcycle's engine a steady roar in my ears. To lose the sedan and reach the old lab by midnight. The adrenaline-fueled fear that I might not survive the night. The sedan stayed on my tail, its headlights glaring in my mirrors. I recognized it. Mark's friend's car, used for business. Antagonist pressure. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Sarah was calling, probably to threaten or lure me back. I ignored it, focusing on the route Robert and I used to take to the lab. The A police siren wailed nearby, and the sedan slowed, hesitating. I seized the chance, cutting through a parking lot and into a residential area. The micro twist. As I slowed to check for turns, I saw the sedan had vanished, but a different car, a van, was now following me, its windows tinted. My stomach churned. Were there others involved? I pushed the bike faster, finally reaching the industrial part of town where the lab was. The building was dark, dilapidated, but I parked behind it and killed the engine. Dr. Evans emerged from the shadows, his face pale. "You made it," he whispered, but then his eyes widened. "They're here," he said, pointing to the van pulling up across the street. I grabbed the journal from my pocket, But as I handed it to him, the van doors slid open. Men in dark clothes stepped out, and one held a syringe. Dr. Evans pulled me inside the lab, locking the door. "We're trapped," he breathed, and I heard the handle jiggle. Inside the lab, dust motes danced in the beam of Dr. Evans's flashlight. To find Robert's antidote compound and barricade ourselves until help arrived. The suffocating certainty that my children had hired thugs to silence us. Dr. Evans hurried to a cabinet, pulling out vials and papers. "Robert's notes say the antidote is here, but it's unstable," he muttered. Antagonist pressure. Pounding started on the door, and the lock groaned under the strain. I helped him shove a heavy table against it, my arms aching. The My phone rang again. Sarah, but this time I answered on speaker. "Mom, come out now, and no one gets hurt," she said, her voice eerily calm. "We just want to talk." I laughed bitterly. "About how you poisoned your father?" Silence, then Mark's voice cut in. "It's over, Mom. We have the house, the money. Don't make this harder." The micro twist. As they spoke, Dr. Evans found a hidden panel in the floor. A safe containing several ampules of the toxin and a batch of antidote. But it was labeled experimental, use within 24 hours. He handed me one. "For protection," he said. The door splintered, and a man's arm reached through. I clutched the antidote ampule, my fingers trembling. Dr. Evans looked at me, his eyes full of fear. "They're coming in," he whispered, and I knew I had to make a choice, fight or flee. But as the door gave way, I saw Sarah step through, holding a gun, her smile triumphant. "Time to go home, Mum," she said, leveling it at Dr. Evans. My breath hitched. I had one chance to use the toxin, but could I do it? Sarah's gun remained steady on Dr. Evans, her smile cold as ice. My fingers tightened around the antidote ampule in my pocket, my one chance to counter the toxin they'd used on Robert. My immediate goal was to create a diversion to disarm Sarah without getting us killed. The moral line I was crossing. Using any weapon felt like becoming the monster they were. Dr. Evans trembled beside me, his breath shallow. Antagonist pressure mounted as the thugs fanned out behind Sarah, blocking the only exit. Mark's voice crackled from a radio one of them held, instructing them to secure the evidence. The pattern interrupt came when a lab shelf behind Sarah rattled violently, dislodging a cascade of glass beakers that shattered on the floor. Everyone flinched, and in that split second, I threw the antidote ampule at Sarah's feet, not to use it, but as a distraction. It burst, releasing a harmless mist she recoiled from. "The micro-twist," Dr. Evans whispered. "That wasn't the antidote, it was a placebo Robert kept for tests." Sarah laughed, lowering the gun slightly. "Pathetic, Mom." But then she coughed, her eyes widening as she realized the mist was a mild irritant Robert had designed for security. She rubbed her eyes, momentarily blinded. I grabbed Dr. Evans's arm, but one of the thugs lunged forward, snatching the journal from my hand. Sarah regained her focus, aiming the gun at me now. "Enough games!" she snarled. "You're coming with us." The thug with the journal backed toward the door, and I saw Mark step inside, holding a syringe filled with a clear liquid. "Time for your medication, Mom," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. My heart stalled. I was out of tricks, and the syringe meant they planned to sedate me. I stood frozen, Mark's syringe glinting in the dim light. My goal shifted to avoiding that needle at all costs. If they injected me, I'd wake up in Shady Pines or worse. The crushing helplessness of being overpowered by my own flesh and blood. Dr. Evans edged closer to me, his voice a shaky whisper. "The ventilation system. Robert rigged it for emergencies. Antagonist pressure. Sarah nodded to the thugs, and two moved to grab me. I ducked, but Mark stepped forward, his expression grim. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he said, his tone almost pleading, but his eyes were dead. The AI loud hiss filled the room as Dr. Evans yanked a hidden lever, and white gas began pouring from the vents. Chaos erupted. Thugs coughing, Sarah shouting orders. In the confusion, I dropped to the floor, crawling toward a storage cabinet Robert had shown me years ago. The micro twist. As I reached it, I found it unlocked, and inside was a small box labeled Contingency Plan. I opened it to find a single dose of the real antidote and a note. "For my love, if they come for you." My eyes stung with tears, but there was no time. The gas cleared enough to see Sarah wiping her eyes, her gun still trained on Dr. Evans. Mark spotted me and lunged, syringe aimed at my neck. I rolled away, but he grabbed my arm, the needle inches from my skin. Just then, the lab door burst open, and a figure stood silhouetted against the streetlights. It was Dr. Evans's wife, holding a phone. "I called the police," she yelled. Sarah's face went pale, but Mark didn't hesitate. He plunged the syringe toward me, and I braced for the sting. The needle grazed my sleeve as I twisted, and it embedded in the floor instead. My heart hammered against my ribs. My new goal was to get the antidote into my system before they could dose me with anything else. The visceral fear of being chemically subdued like Robert. Mark cursed, pulling the empty syringe out, while Sarah barked at the thugs to handle the woman. Dr. Evans's wife stood her ground, phone held high. Antagonist pressure. One thug moved toward her, but she backed into the hall, still shouting for help. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Mark grabbed my arm again, his grip like iron. "We need to go now," he hissed. The lights flickered and died, plunging the lab into near darkness. Only the emergency exit sign glowed. Someone had cut the power. In the blackness, I fumbled with the antidote ampule, managing to crack it open and swallow the contents. It tasted bitter, like almonds. The micro twist. As my vision adjusted, I saw Sarah had retrieved the journal from the thug and was stuffing it into her bag. She pulled out a small device, a USB drive, and slotted it into a lab computer. "Erasing everything," she muttered. But then the computer screen flashed red. "Access denied. Biometric lock active." Robert had safeguarded his files with his fingerprint, long gone. Sarah slammed her fist on the desk. The sirens were right outside now, and blue lights strobed through the windows. Mark dragged me toward a back exit, but I dug my heels in. "Let go of me," I yelled, and for a second he hesitated, his eyes wide with something like shame. Then the door crashed open, and police officers swarmed in, shouting commands. In the chaos, Sarah slipped away through a side door, but Mark held fast to me, whispering, "Play along, or Dr. Evans gets hurt." He nodded toward where a thug had a knife pressed to the doctor's back. My breath caught. I was free, but not safe. The police officers secured the lab, their flashlights sweeping over the scene, to expose my children without endangering Dr. Evans further. The surreal disconnect between the authority figures and the truth they couldn't see. I pointed at Mark, telling the officers he'd attacked me, but he released my arm and put on a concerned son act. "My mother has dementia. She's confused," he said smoothly. Antagonist pressure. One officer nodded, buying his story, while another checked Dr. Evans, who was too terrified to speak up with the thug's knife hidden but nearby. The Dr. Evans's wife stepped forward, holding up her phone. I recorded everything. The threats, the syringe, she announced. The officers focused on her, and in that moment, I saw Mark signal to the thug, who melted into the shadows. The micro twist. When the police reviewed the recording, the audio was garbled. Someone had jammed the signal. Sarah must have had a device. Frustrated, the officers decided to take statements separately. I was led to a patrol car, Mark following, his expression unreadable. As I sat in the back seat, I noticed a folded note tucked into the seat crack. It was from Dr. Evans, slipped to me during the commotion. Meet me at the cemetery at dawn. Bring the toxin. My blood ran cold. He knew I had it. I hadn't told him. The car door closed, and Mark got in the front, speaking quietly with the officer. She's been hallucinating since Dad died, he said, and the officer nodded sympathetically. I clutched the note, realizing Dr. Evans might not be the ally I thought. As we pulled away, I saw Sarah watching from a distance, her phone to her ear. She smiled and mouthed, "See you soon, Mum." The car turned onto the main road, and I knew I was being taken not to safety, but to a trap. The patrol car moved through the quiet streets, the officer driving while Mark sat beside him, spinning lies about my mental state, to escape before they reached the station or Shady Pines. The degrading reality of being labelled incompetent by my own son. I pretended to doze, but my mind raced. Where was the toxin? I'd hidden it in my sock before leaving the house. Antagonist pressure. Mark kept glancing back, his eyes cold, and I heard him whisper to the officer about speeding up the guardianship process. The car hit a pothole, jolting us, and my phone slipped from my pocket, skittering under the seat. I bent to retrieve it, feigning clumsiness, and used the moment to palm the toxin ampule from my sock. The micro twist. As I sat up, I saw Mark watching me in the rearview mirror, his eyebrow raised. He knew I'd moved something. The car slowed at a red light, and I considered breaking the window, but then the officer's radio crackled. A call about a burglary nearby. The officer decided to respond, telling Mark he'd drop us at the station later. We diverted, and as we turned a corner, I saw the cemetery gates, Dr. Evans's meeting spot. My heart pounded. Was this my chance? The officer parked near the scene, telling us to wait. Mark got out to stretch, but I saw him pull out his phone, probably texting Sarah. I clutched the ampule, my fingers sweating. If I ran now, I could make it to the cemetery, but the officer might chase me. Just then, a shadow moved between the headstones, a figure waving frantically. It was Dr. Evans. He pointed to a path, then vanished. Mark turned back toward the car, his phone still in hand. "Everything all right, Mom?" he asked, his voice too casual. I nodded, but my hand tightened around the toxin. The officer approached, saying the burglary was a false alarm, and we'd head to the station now. As he opened the door, I knew I had to act, or lose my last opportunity. I slid the toxin ampule deeper into my palm, my mind screaming for a way out. To feign illness, to delay the station trip and reach Dr. Evans. The physical toll of constant fear. My chest ached with every breath. As the officer started the engine, I groaned, clutching my stomach. "I feel sick," I mumbled, slumping against the seat. Mark sighed, but the officer looked concerned. "We can stop at a clinic," he offered. Antagonist pressure. Mark insisted. "She does this when she's stressed. Let's just get to the station." But the officer pulled over near a drugstore. "I'll get some water," he said, stepping out. As he left, Mark turned to me, his patience gone. "What are you playing at, Mom?" he snapped, reaching for my arm. I jerked back, and the toxin ampule fell from my hand, rolling under the seat. We both froze, staring at it. The micro twist. Mark's eyes widened, not with anger, but with recognition. He knew what it was. He leaned down to grab it, but I kicked his hand away. "Don't," I warned, my voice low. He smirked. "You wouldn't dare." But then the officer returned, holding a bottle of water. Mark straightened, composing himself. "False alarm," he said, but his eyes stayed on me. The officer handed me the water, and I drank, buying time. Through the window, I saw Dr. Evans emerge from the cemetery gate, signaling urgently. The officer noticed him too. "Who's that?" he asked. Mark followed his gaze, and his face hardened. "No one," he said quickly. But Dr. Evans started walking toward us. The officer stepped out to intercept him, and Mark seized the chance. He lunged for the toxin under the seat, but I was faster. I grabbed it and shoved the door open, stumbling into the street. "Help!" I screamed, drawing attention from passers-by. Mark cursed, but the officer turned, confused. Dr. Evans reached my side, panting. "They're planning to frame you," he whispered. "Sarah planted evidence at your house." My blood ran cold as I saw Mark on his phone, doubtless calling for backup. The officer approached, his hand on his holster. "Ma'am, what's going on?" he asked, and I knew I had seconds to decide. Trust Dr. Evans or run. I held up the toxin ampule, my hand shaking. "This is what they used to kill my husband," I told the officer, my voice cracking, to convince him before Mark intervened. The risk of being disbelieved and institutionalized. The officer frowned, glancing between me and Mark. Dr. Evans backed me up. "It's true, I have proof," he said. But Mark stepped forward, smooth as ever. "She's delusional, officer. That's just water in a vial." Antagonist pressure. Mark showed the officer a photo on his phone, a forged medical report diagnosing me with paranoia. The officer's stance shifted. He was buying it. The A car screeched to a halt nearby, and Sarah jumped out, holding a folder. "I have the guardianship papers," she announced, waving them. "Mum, let's go home." She approached, but her eyes were on the toxin in my hand, the micro twist. As she reached us, Dr. Evans blurted, "Check her bag. She has the journal." Sarah froze, clutching her purse tighter. The officer, now suspicious, asked to see it. Sarah hesitated, then handed it over. Inside was the journal, but also a small bag of white powder, planted evidence to frame me for drug possession. My heart sank. "That's not mine," I said, but the officer's expression turned stern. "Everyone needs to come to the station," he declared. Mark smiled triumphantly. As he cuffed me, I slipped the toxin ampule into Dr. Evans' coat pocket, hoping he'd understand. Sarah leaned close, her whisper venomous. "You should have taken the easy way, Mom." They led me to the patrol car, but as we drove off, I saw Dr. Evans duck into an alley, the toxin safe for now. But my children had won this round. I was in custody, and they had the journal back. In the police station, I was placed in a holding room, the walls a dull grey. To contact a lawyer or someone who'd believe me before they transferred me to Shady Pines. The crushing isolation of being labelled a criminal by my own children. Mark and Sarah spoke with detectives, their voices calm and convincing through the thin walls. Antagonist pressure. An officer brought in the found drugs, citing them as reason for emergency guardianship. I denied everything, but without evidence, I was just a confused old woman. The Dr. Evans arrived, demanding to see me. He'd called a family friend who was a retired judge, and suddenly the detectives paused. They let him in, and he handed me a note. "The toxin is safe. I hid it." Relief washed over me, but then I read the rest. Sarah has a backup plan. She's accessing your bank accounts now. My stomach churned. The micro twist. As Dr. Evans left, Mark entered, holding a tablet. "Sign this, Mum," he said, showing me electronic transfer forms. "It's for your care." I refused, but he leaned in, his voice a whisper. "Do it, or Dr. Evans has an accident tonight." The threat was clear. I pretended to comply, scribbling a fake signature. But Mark checked it and laughed. Nice try. He called in a witness, a woman posing as a social worker, to certify my incapacity. Just then, my phone, which they'd returned briefly, buzzed with an alert. A large withdrawal from my savings. Sarah was cleaning me out. I stood, yelling for help, but the officers shrugged, bought off or fooled. As they led me to a cell for the night, I saw Sarah in the hallway, counting cash from an envelope. She winked. "Sleep tight, Mum." The cell door clanged shut, and I slumped on the cot, defeated. But then I felt something in my shoe. A key Dr. Evans must have slipped me. It was for the lab's back door. Hope flickered. I had one way out, but only if I could reach it. I waited until the station grew quiet, the night shift less vigilant, to pick the cell lock with the key and escape to the lab, the terrifying prospect of becoming a fugitive. I worked the key into the lock, but it was too large. It must be for something else. Frustration boiled over. Antagonist pressure. An officer did rounds, shining a light into cells. I pretended to sleep, my heart pounding. After he passed, I examined the key. It had a logo from Robert's lab. Maybe it opened a safe or a hidden room there. The commotion erupted down the hall. Someone had been brought in drunk, and the officers were distracted. I used the chaos to slip a paperclip from my pocket, I'd palmed it earlier, and jimmied the lock. It clicked open. I crept out, staying in shadows. The micro twist. As I reached the exit, I saw Mark talking with the desk sergeant, handing him an envelope. Another bribe. They hadn't noticed me yet. I slipped outside into the cool night air, but my car was gone. Impounded. I had to run. Dr. Evans's note had mentioned the lab, so I headed there on foot, sticking to alleys. After a block, a car slowed beside me. It was Dr. Evans in his old sedan. "Get in," he urged. I did, and we sped away. "They froze your assets," he said, his face grim. "But I have the toxin and antidote at the lab." We arrived, and he led me inside through the back door his key fit. The lab was trashed from earlier, but he went to a hidden panel in the wall. Inside was the toxin ampule and a few antidote doses. "We need to act fast," he said. But then headlights swept the windows, a car pulling up. Dr. Evans peered out. "It's Sarah," he whispered. "She has someone with her." The door handle jiggled, and I realized we were trapped again. Sarah's voice called out, "I know you're in there, Mom. Come out, or I burn the place down." I clutched an antidote dose, my mind racing. Was this the end? Sarah's threat echoed through the lab, and I saw the glow of a flashlight under the door. To use the toxin to defend ourselves without causing death. The ethical abyss of harming my daughter, no matter what she'd done. Dr. Evans handed me the toxin ampule. "It's aerosol. Break it, and it disperses quickly. Use the antidote first." I nodded, swallowing an antidote dose. It tasted metallic, and a coolness spread through me. Antagonist pressure. The door shook as someone kicked it, and I heard Mark's voice now too. "We're out of time, Mom," he yelled. The fire alarm blared from a nearby building, a coincidence that made everyone jump. In the second of confusion, I threw the toxin ampule at the door. It shattered, and a faint mist filled the air. Sarah and Mark coughed, stumbling back. The micro twist. As they retreated, I saw Sarah pull out a gas mask from her bag. She'd come prepared. She advanced, unaffected, while Mark collapsed, wheezing. She stepped over him, her eyes locked on me. "You always were too soft, Mum," she said, raising a syringe. Dr. Evans tried to block her, but she shoved him aside. I stood my ground, the empty ampule in my hand. "It's over, Sarah," I said, but she laughed. "Not yet." She lunged, and I ducked, but she grabbed my hair, forcing the syringe toward my neck. Just then, police sirens wailed outside. Dr. Evans's wife must have called them again. Sarah hesitated, and I broke free, but she smiled coldly. "They'll arrest you for assault," she said, nodding at Mark, who was now unconscious. The lab door burst open, officers pouring in. Sarah dropped the syringe and raised her hands. "She attacked us," she cried, pointing at me. The officers surrounded me, and I saw the truth in their eyes. They believed her. As they cuffed me, Sarah mouthed, "I win." But then one officer checked Mark's pulse and called for an ambulance. "He's alive, but unstable," he said. Sarah's smile faltered. She hadn't expected that. They led me away, but I clung to one hope. Mark might talk if he survived. The ambulance lights flashed, and I knew the battle wasn't over yet. The police shoved me into an interrogation room, the cuffs digging into my wrists as Sarah's accusations echoed in my ears. To turn the tables using the recording Dr. Evans' wife had, if it could be recovered. The humiliation of being treated like a criminal by the people sworn to protect me. Sarah stood outside the glass, giving a statement to a detective, her tears flawless and fake. Antagonist pressure mounted when the detective entered, sliding a photo of Mark in the hospital across the table. "He's in a coma," he said, his voice flat. "If he dies, this becomes murder." The pattern interrupt came when Dr. Evans burst into the station, demanding to speak with me, but officers held him back. Through the window, I saw him mouth, "The USB. Check it." The micro twist. The detective's phone buzzed. A message from the lab about the toxins residue on Mark's clothes, matching Robert's case. He frowned, then left abruptly. Sarah's smile through the glass wavered as he passed her. I was alone again, but the door opened and a different officer entered, one I recognized from Robert's old neighborhood. He uncuffed me, his voice low. "I knew your husband. Tell me what really happened." But as I began, Sarah stepped in, holding a lawyer's card. "She's not speaking without counsel," she declared, her eyes daring me to defy her. The officer hesitated, and I knew Sarah had bought more time to cover her tracks. I was transferred to a holding cell. The lawyer, a slick man Sarah hired, insisting I plead guilty to avoid a harsher sentence. My goal became to contact Dr. Evans's wife and get that recording to the right person. The deepening isolation as even the system failed me. Hours passed, and I learned Mark was stable but unresponsive. Sarah visited him, playing the grieving daughter. Antagonist pressure. The lawyer presented a plea deal. Involuntary commitment to Shady Pines in exchange for dropped charges. I refused, but he warned, "They have witnesses who will say you threatened Mark." The pattern interrupt occurred when a nurse from the hospital, a friend of Dr. Evans, slipped me a note during a medical check. "Mark mumbled your name. He's waking up." Hope surged, but the micro twist. Sarah had already posted guards outside his room to control who saw him. I needed to get to that hospital. The lawyer returned, smug. "They're moving you to Shady Pines tonight for evaluation." As officers led me out, I saw Dr. Evans in the parking lot, gesturing toward a van. He'd created a distraction, a fake fire alarm at the station. In the chaos, I broke free and ran toward him, but Sarah stepped from a car, blocking my path. "Going somewhere, Mom?" she asked, holding up a syringe. "It's time for your medication." The officers closed in, and I realized Dr. Evans's van was too far. I was trapped again. Sarah advanced with the syringe, her eyes cold, while officers hesitated, confused by the alarm. To disarm her and reach Dr. Evans's van, the visceral fear of being drugged and disappeared. I backed away, but she lunged, and I grabbed her wrist, twisting until the syringe clattered to the ground. Antagonist pressure. The officers, now alert, moved to restrain me, but Dr. Evans revved the van's engine, drawing their attention. The A News van pulled up. Reporters tipped off about police corruption. Cameras flashed, and Sarah froze, her public image at risk. The micro twist. As she composed herself, I snatched the syringe and hid it in my sleeve. Dr. Evans shouted, "Get in!" And I sprinted to the van, diving inside as he sped off. We raced through streets, but Sarah's car followed, her face furious in the rear view. "We need to get to the hospital before she silences Mark," Dr. Evans said, his hands tight on the wheel. I checked the syringe. It was filled with a sedative, not the toxin. Sarah was keeping me alive for now, probably to access more funds. The micro twist deepened when Dr. Evans's phone rang. It was his wife, saying Sarah had just withdrawn the last of my savings. "She's emptying your accounts," he reported, and my heart sank. We reached the hospital, but as we parked, I saw Sarah's car right behind us. She stepped out, phone to ear, and smiled. "It's over, Mum. The police are on their way." Dr. Evans gripped my arm. "We have to move now," he urged, but I knew we were out of options. We rushed into the hospital through a service entrance, Dr. Evans leading me to Mark's floor, to reach Mark's room and record any confession before Sarah intervened. The moral weight of hoping my son would incriminate himself to save me. The hallway was quiet, but Sarah's guards stood outside Mark's door. 2 large men in dark suits. Antagonist pressure. One guard spotted us and started toward us, hand on his radio. Dr. Evans pushed me into a supply closet, whispering, "Distract them. I'll get to Mark." I stepped out, pretending to be lost, and asked the guard for directions. He eyed me suspiciously, but then a code blue blared over the intercom, a patient in crisis down the hall. The both guards rushed toward the noise, leaving the door unguarded. The micro twist. As I slipped into Mark's room, I found him awake, his eyes wide with fear. He grabbed my hand, his voice a rasp. "Mum, I'm sorry. Sarah made me do it." But before he could say more, the door opened, and Sarah stood there, holding a doctor's coat. "Touching," she sneered, then called out, "Security! She's harassing my brother." I backed away, but Mark's grip tightened. "The ledger. Check the safe deposit box," he whispered, then fell back, feigning unconsciousness. Sarah advanced, and I knew I had to run. As security approached, I ducked into the stairwell, Dr. Evans waiting. "Did he talk?" he asked. I nodded, breathless. "We need a key from the house," I said. But then footsteps echoed above. Sarah's guards were coming. We fled down the stairs, the sound of pursuit close behind. We burst out into the hospital parking lot, the cold night air sharp in my lungs, to retrieve the safe deposit key from my house before Sarah could. The exhaustion of running, my body aching with every step. Dr. Evans's van was where we left it, but Sarah's car was gone. She must have stayed to manage Mark. Antagonist pressure. My phone buzzed with alerts. Multiple failed login attempts on my bank account. Sarah was getting desperate. We drove toward my neighborhood, but as we turned onto my street, I saw lights on in the house. Sarah had beat us there. The neighbor's dog barked loudly, setting off a chain of barks, and porch lights flicked on. Dr. Evans parked a block away, and we crept through backyards. The micro twist. When we reached my house, the back door was unlocked, and inside, Sarah was on the phone, arguing with someone about destroying the evidence. She hadn't found the key yet. It was hidden in a false bottom of Robert's favorite chair. I signaled Dr. Evans to cause a diversion outside, and he tossed a rock against the garage door. Sarah rushed out to investigate, and I slipped inside, heading for the study. But as I felt for the key, I heard a click, the front door locking. Sarah stood there, smiling. "Looking for this?" she asked, holding the key. She'd known all along. "Now, Mom, let's talk about that safe deposit box," she said, stepping closer. I backed into the room, my mind racing for an escape. Sarah dangled the key, her expression triumphant, to retrieve it and get out before she called her thugs. The crushing defeat of being outsmarted in my own home. I feigned weakness, slumping against the wall. "I'm tired, Sarah. Let's just end this," I mumbled, hoping to lure her closer. Antagonist pressure. She laughed, but her phone rang. It was Mark, and she answered on speaker. "She's here," he said, his voice weak. "Don't let her leave." Sarah pocketed the key and pulled out zip ties. "Time to secure you, Mum." The Dr. Evans threw a brick through the window, shattering glass everywhere. Sarah flinched, and I lunged, grabbing the key from her pocket. We struggled, but she was stronger, forcing me to the ground. The micro twist. As she tightened the ties, I bit her hand, and she recoiled, dropping the key. I scrambled for it, but she kicked it under the sofa. "Enough!" she yelled, and her phone buzzed with a text. "Cops incoming. Neighbor called." She cursed, then ran out the back door. I freed myself and retrieved the key. But as I stood, police sirens wailed outside. Dr. Evans waved from the window. "We have to go, now!" he urged. I rushed out, but an officer spotted us. "Freeze!" he shouted. We dove into the van, and Dr. Evans sped away, but I saw Sarah watching from a distance, phone in hand. She'd set us up. The key was safe, but we were now wanted fugitives. We drove to a motel on the outskirts of town, the key burning a hole in my pocket. To access the safe deposit box at the bank, first thing in the morning. The surreal reality of being on the run from my children and the law. Dr. Evans booked a room under a fake name, and we huddled inside, planning our next move. Antagonist pressure. My phone died, cutting off access to my accounts, and news reports showed my photo as a person of interest in Mark's assault. The AA knock on the door. It was the motel manager, saying someone had reported a suspicious vehicle. Dr. Evans talked him down, but we knew we couldn't stay long. The micro twist. When I checked the key, I noticed an engraving, a number sequence that matched Robert's old lab code. Maybe the box contained more than documents. At dawn, we drove to the bank, but as we parked, I saw Sarah's car across the street. She'd anticipated us. "We need a distraction," Dr. Evans said, and he called in a fake bomb threat to a nearby building. Police swarmed the area, and in the chaos, I entered the bank. The clerk led me to the box, but when I opened it, I found it empty, except for a single note in Robert's handwriting. "If you're reading this, they've already won. Destroy the toxin." My hands trembled. Sarah must have cleared it out. As I turned, the clerk smiled. It was one of Sarah's thugs in disguise. "She's waiting for you outside," he said. I backed away, but the bank doors locked automatically. I was trapped, and through the glass, I saw Sarah approaching, holding a familiar metal box, the one from the lab. She waved, then opened it to show the toxin ampules inside. "Last chance, Mom," she mouthed. The police were distracted, and no one was coming to help. I stood frozen in the bank lobby, the fake clerk blocking the exit, to create a scene to attract attention and escape. The desperation of being cornered in a public place with no allies. Sarah entered, the metal box under her arm, her smile predatory. "Give me the key, and I'll make this quick," she said, her voice low. Antagonist pressure. She showed me a photo on her phone, Dr. Evans being detained by police outside. "He's under arrest for aiding you," she added. An elderly bank customer stumbled, dropping a bag of coins that scattered noisily across the floor. Everyone turned, and I used the moment to shout, "Fire! Everyone out!" Panic erupted, and people rushed the doors. The micro twist. In the confusion, I grabbed the metal box from Sarah, but it was lightweight, empty. She laughed. "Did you really think I'd bring the real thing?" She had the toxin elsewhere. Security guards moved in, and Sarah pointed at me. "She's the one causing trouble." They grabbed my arms, but I broke free and ran to the back office, locking the door. Through the window, I saw Dr. Evans in a police car and Sarah on the phone, probably calling her thugs. I found a bank phone and dialed 911, reporting a hostage situation, lying to buy time. But as I spoke, the door shook. Someone was picking the lock. I backed into a corner, searching for a weapon. The door swung open, and Sarah stood there, holding a syringe. "Time's up, Mom," she said, stepping inside. I had nowhere to go, and the syringe gleamed in the light. Sarah advanced with the syringe, her eyes locked on mine, to disarm her and use the chaos to free Dr. Evans. The finality of this moment. Either I stopped her, or I died. I grabbed a letter opener from the desk, holding it shakily. "Don't come closer," I warned, but she smirked. "You won't hurt me, Mum." Antagonist pressure. Outside, police were redirecting traffic, unaware of the real threat. Sarah lunged, and I sidestepped, slashing her arm with the opener. She cried out, dropping the syringe, but then tackled me to the ground. The bank alarm finally triggered, blaring loudly, and sprinklers activated, drenching us both. Sarah slipped, and I scrambled away, grabbing the syringe. The micro twist. As I stood, I saw the syringe was labeled with an antidote, not toxin. Sarah had planned to sedate me, not kill me. She wanted me alive for the inheritance. She rose, clutching her arm, and smiled through gritted teeth. "You're too predictable." But then the door burst open, and Dr. Evans stood there, free. He'd convinced the police to check Sarah's car, where they found the toxin. "It's over, Sarah," he said, but she laughed. "Is it?" She pulled out a remote detonator. "I wired the lab. If I press this, it goes up, and the toxin spreads." My blood ran cold. She backed toward the exit, and the police hesitated. "Let me go, or everyone pays," she threatened. I met her gaze, my hand tightening around the syringe. "No, Sarah," I said, and threw it at her. It struck her chest, and she gasped, pressing the detonator, but nothing happened. The micro twist. Dr. Evans had disabled it earlier. Sarah stared in shock, and police swarmed her, cuffing her. As they led her away, she screamed, "I'll get out, Mum. I always do." But for now, she was contained. I sank to the floor, exhausted, but Dr. Evans helped me up. "It's not over yet," he whispered. "Mark is talking to the DA." Relief washed over me, but then my phone buzzed. An alert that my assets were frozen pending investigation. The battle was won, but the war wasn't over. We left the bank, the morning sun glaring as police processed the scene. To ensure Mark's testimony held up and reclaim my life. The hollow victory. My children were criminals, and I was alone. Dr. Evans drove me to the police station to give my statement, and on the way, he explained that Mark had confessed to the poisoning under pressure from Sarah, antagonist pressure. Sarah's lawyer was already working on her bail, citing family coercion. At the station, I met with the DA, who confirmed Mark's statement implicated Sarah in Robert's murder and the plot against me. As I signed the papers, a detective handed me a box, Sarah's personal effects, including a journal she'd kept. Inside, she detailed everything, even her regret, but it was too late. The micro twist. The last entry was from today. If I fail, the toxin is in the house vents, set to release if I don't check in. My blood ran cold. We rushed to my home, where hazmat teams were already inspecting, but they found nothing. Sarah had bluffed. I stood in the empty house, the silence deafening. Dr. Evans offered to stay, but I declined. I needed to face this alone. Later, I visited Mark in the hospital. He was awake, remorseful, and agreed to testify fully. As I left, I saw Sarah in a holding cell through a window. She met my eyes, and for a second, I saw the little girl she once was, but it vanished into hatred. I turned away, knowing the legal process would drag on, but I had my freedom back. That night, I sat in Robert's study, holding his photo. The quiet was unsettling, but for the first time in months, I breathed easily. The revenge was done, but my family. I knew I'd never see them again outside a courtroom, and that was a pain no victory could erase. The DA's office called at dawn, informing me that Sarah had posted bail using hidden funds I didn't know she had. My hands clenched around the phone. She was free again, and I had to act before she disappeared. To find where she'd stashed the remaining toxin ampules before she could use them on me or flee. The sleepless nights and constant vigilance were wearing me down to a raw nerve. I drove to the police station to demand answers, but the officer on duty shrugged, saying white-collar crimes often see quick bail. Antagonist pressure mounted when I received a text from an unknown number. "You should have killed me when you had the chance, Mom." Sarah was taunting me, and I knew she'd strike soon. The pattern interrupt came as I left the station. A car backfired loudly, making me jump. And in that moment, I spotted Sarah's silhouette in a parked vehicle across the street. She drove off before I could react. The micro twist. When I checked my car, I found a note on the windshield. The lab wasn't the only place Dad hid things. Check the garden shed. It was signed with Robert's old initials, but the handwriting was Sarah's. A trap. I rushed home, my heart pounding, and headed to the shed. Inside, under a pile of pots, I found a locked box. But as I reached for it, the shed door slammed shut behind me. The lock clicked. I was trapped. And through the window, I saw Sarah smiling as she walked away, holding a key. My phone had no signal, and the air grew thin. I had to find a way out before she returned with worse intentions. I battered the shed door with an old shovel, the wood splintering but holding fast. To escape and confront Sarah at her weak point, her overconfidence. The physical strain aggravated my arthritis, each blow sending jolts of pain up my arms. Outside, I heard Sarah on the phone, her voice smug as she discussed handling the final loose end with someone, probably one of her thugs. Antagonist pressure. She started a lawnmower, its roar drowning out my shouts for help. The pattern interrupt occurred when the neighbour's cat, startled by the noise, darted into the shed through a broken vent, knocking over a can of paint that splattered everywhere. In the distraction, I used the shovel to pry the vent wider and squeezed through, scraping my sides on the metal. The micro twist. As I emerged, I saw Sarah wasn't alone. Mark was with her, out of the hospital and looking pale but determined. He held up a hand, stopping her from approaching me. "It's over, Sarah," he said, his voice shaky. "I told the DA everything, including where you hid the toxin." Sarah's face twisted in rage, and she lunged at him, but I stepped between them. "Enough," I said. But then Mark pulled a small vial from his pocket. It was one of the toxin ampules. "I took this from her stash," he admitted, but his eyes darted nervously. Sarah laughed. "You fool, that's a placebo." She turned to me, her smile cold. "The real ones are already in play, Mum." She nodded toward my house, and I saw a faint mist seeping from an open window. My blood ran cold. She'd rigged the ventilation system after all. I sprinted toward the house, ignoring the pain in my joints, to shut down the ventilation before the toxin spread, but I had no antidote left. The terrifying thought that I might be too late to save myself or anyone nearby. Sarah and Mark argued behind me, their voices fading as I burst through the front door. The air smelled faintly sweet, a sign of the toxin. "Antagonist pressure," Sarah shouted from outside. "It's on a timer, Mum. You have 10 minutes. I rushed to the basement where the main HVAC unit was, but the door was locked from the inside. The power cut out, plunging me into darkness, and I fumbled for my phone's flashlight. In the beam, I saw a note taped to the door. "Check the fuse box, love." It was in Robert's handwriting, but it felt off. The micro twist. When I opened the fuse box, I found not just circuits, but a small recording device playing Robert's voice. A message he'd left in case of emergency. "If you hear this, the toxin is active. The antidote is in my old golf bag." My heart leaped, but then the recording ended with static, and Sarah's voice came through, mocking. "Too bad I already searched there, Mum." I heard footsteps on the stairs. Sarah was coming down, holding a real ampule. "Time to join Dad," she said, advancing. I backed against the wall, my mind racing for a way out, but the toxin's effects were starting. My vision blurred at the edges. I clutched the wall for support, my breathing shallow as the toxin took hold. To reach Robert's golf bag in the garage before I lost consciousness. The dizziness and nausea made every movement a struggle. Sarah stepped closer, the ampule glinting in her hand. "Don't fight it, Mum," she purred. "Antagonist pressure." Mark appeared at the top of the stairs, yelling for her to stop, but she ignored him. The garage door opener suddenly whirred, activated remotely. Dr. Evans must have arrived. Light flooded the basement stairs, and Sarah hesitated, distracted. I used that second to shove past her and stumble up the steps, my legs weak. The micro twist. In the garage, I found the golf bag, but it was empty, except for a note from Robert. "The antidote was never here. I lied to protect you." Despair washed over me, but then Dr. Evans rushed in, holding a syringe. "I synthesized a batch from Robert's notes," he said, injecting me. Relief flooded my system as the antidote counteracted the toxin, but as my vision cleared, I saw Sarah in the doorway, aiming a gun at Dr. Evans. "You ruin everything!" she snarled and fired. He crumpled to the ground and I screamed, rushing to his side. Sarah fled, and I heard tires screeching away. Dr. Evans was bleeding but alive. "The police are on their way," he gasped. "But Sarah has a plane to catch. She's fleeing the country." I had to stop her before she escaped justice. I applied pressure to Dr. Evans's wound with my scarf, my hands trembling, to get him help and then track Sarah down before she left. The guilt of dragging him into this. His pale face was a stark reminder of the cost. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Antagonist pressure. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Sarah was listed as a person of interest, but no bolo yet. The Mark stumbled into the garage, holding his side. He'd been grazed by Sarah's bullet in the struggle. "I know where she's going," he wheezed. "The private airfield. She has a jet waiting." The micro twist. He handed me a keycard. "This accesses the hangar. I was supposed to go with her." I stared at him, torn between distrust and necessity. The police arrived, and paramedics took Dr. Evans and Mark to the hospital. I explained everything to a detective, who agreed to send units to the airfield. But as I got into my car to follow, I found another note on the seat. "If you come, I'll release the toxin in a public place. Your choice, Mum." It was signed with a smiley face, Sarah's trademark. My hands shook on the wheel. I had to go, but the risk was immense. I drove toward the airfield, praying I wasn't too late. The airfield was 20 minutes away, and I pushed the car to its limits. To intercept Sarah without triggering a mass casualty event. The crushing responsibility of potential innocent lives on my conscience. As I approached, I saw police cars converging, but they kept their distance. Sarah had threatened to detonate the toxin if they moved in. Antagonist pressure. She called my phone, her voice calm. "I'm on the plane, Mum. Join me, or I press the button." I parked and sprinted toward the hangar, the keycard in hand. The fuel truck driver, unaware of the situation, started refueling the jet, creating a diversion. I slipped inside the hangar and saw Sarah through the plane's window, holding a device. The micro twist. As I boarded, I realized the device was a fake, a remote for a toy car. She laughed. I bluffed. "The toxin's back at the house, set to release if I don't check in hourly." But then her smile faded. Mark stood behind me, supported by crutches, with police flanking him. "I called in a favor," he said. "The house is being swept as we speak." Sarah's eyes widened in fury, and she lunged at me, but officers restrained her. As they cuffed her, she spat. "You haven't won." But then she whispered something that made my blood run cold. "Dad's not the only one I poisoned." I froze, thinking of Robert, but she meant others. Maybe Dr. Evans or even me, slowly. The police led her away, and I stood there, shaken. Had she already dosed me with something undetectable? Back at the hospital, I insisted on a full toxicology screening for myself and Dr. Evans, to uncover any slow-acting poisons Sarah might have administered. The paranoia that every ache or cough was a sign of something sinister. Hours passed, and the doctors found nothing. Sarah's claim was another bluff, but the fear lingered. Antagonist pressure. Sarah's lawyer visited, threatening to sue for wrongful arrest if evidence didn't hold up. I met with the DA, who assured me the case was strong, with Mark's testimony and the recovered toxin. The Dr. Evans was discharged, and we went to my house, now a crime scene, to retrieve personal items. In Robert's study, I found a hidden compartment in his desk I'd never noticed. It held a journal detailing his early suspicions about the children. The micro twist. The last entry was from a year ago, describing how he'd begun microdosing himself with the toxin to build immunity, hoping to survive long enough to expose them. He'd failed, but his notes included a formula for a permanent antidote. I clutched the journal, tears in my eyes. He'd tried to protect me until the end. Dr. Evans promised to synthesize the antidote, but as we left, my phone rang. It was the hospital. Mark had taken a turn for the worse. They suspected secondary poisoning. I rushed back, wondering if Sarah had somehow reached him from jail. Mark was unconscious in ICU, doctors baffled by his symptoms. To find out if Sarah had an accomplice still active. The emotional whiplash of fearing for the son who betrayed me. I reviewed security footage from the hospital and saw a woman in a nurse's uniform, one of Sarah's thugs, injecting something into Mark's IV before fleeing. Antagonist pressure. The police were slow to act, citing jurisdictional issues. I provided the footage, but hours dragged on with no arrest. The Dr. Evans arrived with the newly synthesized antidote, and we convinced a doctor to administer it to Mark. Within minutes, his vitals stabilized. Sarah had been poisoning him gradually to silence him. The micro-twist. When Mark woke, he confessed that Sarah had a partner, their cousin, a disbarred lawyer who'd helped cover Robert's murder. He gave a name and address, and I passed it to the police. They arrested the cousin at his home, finding more toxin and evidence. As I left the hospital, I felt a semblance of closure, but my phone buzzed with a call from the jail. Sarah demanded to see me. "I have one more secret, Mom," she said, her voice hollow. "About Dad's last words." I knew it was a manipulation, but I agreed to go, driven by a need for finality. The jail visiting room was cold, Sarah behind glass, her eyes empty. To hear her out without falling for her lies. The surreal sadness of seeing my daughter reduced to this. She leaned forward, whispering. "Dad knew about the poisoning weeks before he died. He told me to stop, but I didn't. His last words were, 'Forgive them.'" I recoiled, tears welling. Was it true? Antagonist pressure. She smiled, seeing my pain. "He loved you too much to fight, Mom. You're just like him." The A-guard announced the end of visiting hours, and Sarah stood to leave. The micro-twist. As she turned, she slipped a folded paper through the slot. A drawing from when she was a child, of our family together. "I kept this all these years," she said, then walked away without another word. I unfolded it, my hands shaking, and saw Robert's handwriting on the back. "Family is worth saving." Was it a forgery? I didn't know. I left the jail, the drawing in my pocket, and drove to the cemetery where Robert was buried. Sitting by his grave, I realized that revenge hadn't brought peace, only more pain. The legal battles would continue, but my part was over. I had to find a way to move on. Alone. I spread Robert's ashes in our garden, as he'd wanted, the morning sun warm on my face, to reclaim my life and home, slowly and quietly, the profound loneliness that settled in the silence, but also a fragile sense of freedom. I donated most of the lab equipment to a university, keeping only a few of Robert's personal effects. Antagonist pressure. Sarah's trial date was set, and Mark entered a rehab program for his guilt. But I knew I'd never see either of them again outside court. The Dr. Evans stopped by with a potted plant, a rose bush Robert had loved, and we planted it together, a small act of healing. The micro-twist. As we worked, I found a sealed envelope buried in the soil, containing a letter from Robert. "My dearest, if you're reading this, you survived them. Live well, and know I'm proud of you." I cried then, for the first time in months, not from anger, but from love. The cliffhanger faded into resolution. I sold the house and moved to a smaller place near the ocean, where the sound of waves drowned out the past. I started volunteering at a local library, sharing stories with children, and in their smiles, I found pieces of the grandmother I wanted to be. The revenge was done, the justice served, but the quiet moments, reading on the porch, tending to roses, remembering Robert without bitterness, became my new revenge, a life lived fully, despite them. And in that, I finally found peace.